I believe many of you have had an experience of walking into a modern art gallery and feeling perplexed. Not quite sure what is it I am supposed to feel looking at those pieces. Let's be honest, I had this experience too. We might rush to the label next to the frame, striving for an explanation, for an answer to what is it I am allowed to feel. What if I were to tell you that not all exhibitions have in fact the interest of the artist in mind, and how instead of being marveled at, a painting can be hung in a gallery in order to be ridiculed instead? What I'm talking about is the Degenerate Art Exhibition held in 1937 in Germany, fully curated by the Nazi Party. It consists of hundreds of artworks, seized and confiscated from their authors by the party officials. Some artworks were hung crooked, some not even framed. If you were to walk through these galleries' doors, would you still rush to the label? The artwork about which I'm going to talk about today is called The Bride of the Wind by the Austrian painter Oskar Kokoschka. The first time I read this name was in a history textbook. However, it wasn't his contribution to the expressionist art movement or continuation of teaching and creating art despite the social uncertainty of the 20th century that gave him this honor. Instead, Oskar Kokoschka's name ended up in my textbook in a list of degenerate artists, deemed so by the Nazi regime. Although it's challenging to pin down what exactly unites all the artists that ended up on this list, one thing is apparent. The purpose of the Degenerate Art Exhibition was to consolidate in people's minds a strictly bordered, culturally appropriate definition of art. Anything that did not fit this mythology was seen as an attack against art, against culture itself, as described by the Kaiser of Nazi Germany himself. Works of art which cannot be understood in themselves but need some pretentious instruction book to justify their existence. Those artworks, instead of being viewed as a space of infinite possibility, are more easily reduced into a single thing, degenerate, and thus not even worth trying to understand, with The Bride of the Wind being one of them. This painting in particular now, viewed in retrospect, having been painted over a century ago, is given many, often contradictory meanings. Some claim it is first and foremost about love. After all, the two figures at the forefront are Oskar Kokoschka himself and his lover Alma. Others insist that while, yes, the painting does indeed focus the relationship that the two had, it is merely a reflection of the turbulent political times at which it was made, and that their relationship's decline is representative of nothing less than the dwindling of a whole nation. What I'm doing right now is retelling other people's thought about the artwork, but instead I want you to actually engage with it, to treat each fact that we know about its history as a singular brushstroke that, only blended with other strokes, creates a painting that we see in front of our eyes. And what is it we see in front of our eyes? Limbs fused with surroundings. Soon it becomes impossible to tell when one ends and another starts. Skin painted almost translucent contrasts with the bold and assertive brushstrokes surrounding the figures. Are they mountain hills or stormy waves in the background? I would argue that this vortex of blues, greens, and yellows together creates a sort of horror vacuum, a term used in art to describe an empty space on a canvas that is filled with excessive detail, literally translated as the fear of the empty. This makes the painting dynamic, the meanings all the more abundant and elusive. Notably, when looking at the evolution of early sketches for this art piece, it can be seen how the male figure, representing Kokoschka himself, gradually moves further away from his lover alongside him. Although it can be easily overlooked, his hand strives away from her body, his gaze shifts further into the distance. This tells us that there is a whole history hidden underneath the brushstrokes, a life lived. Yet in the end, it is a solid piece of fiber and oil paint, fundamentally an inanimate object, it embraces the uncertainty of it all, accepting it. In his teachings, Kokoschka approached understanding art as an experience within one's own realm of consciousness, with the picture that we see in front of our eyes being its mirror. And I think that is how we can approach memory, too. Learning about Kokoschka in this moment in history made me reflect upon the history of my own family, my memory of them, or rather the absence of that memory. I recall after a long school day, far away from home, calling my grandmother on the phone and telling her of everything I've learned, of the degenerate art exhibition, of fleeing, of death, and of Kokoschka too. I remember telling her that even after learning by heart all the places, the names, the days of the week, I still cannot picture. The suffering seemed too great. In return, for the first time in my life, she told me of her mother, who at exactly the same age as me right now, 16 years old, the Nazis abducted and placed in an Austrian labor camp. How can one possibly picture this? She was my age, my blood, and yet I can't. Immediate reaction in a situation of the sort is to detach oneself, to claim that because the suffering seems too great to truly grasp, I shouldn't even try. Suddenly, it came crashing down at me. I, too, felt tempted to refuse that which I could not understand. I, too, found it easier to confine the memories that I have of my grandmother into a single tragedy, and thus give the oppressors exactly what they wanted. And for that, I would have never forgiven myself. So I stepped back to see the whole picture. And even if my vision got blurry as I pulled further and further away, the least I could do was squint and try to picture it. Not to retell other people's interpretation, but to actually engage with the artwork, which is, in this context, alive. And as I tried, I realized that if the memories that I have of my great-grandmother was a painting, it would look something like The Bride of the Wind, in a way in which it embraces ambiguity. I know of the suffering, but that is not the whole picture. To paint it, yes, I want to know how much more were the Austrian prisoners given than the Slavs, but I also want to know the color of her favorite dress. Yes, I want to know of the gas chambers, and I want to know of how she braided her hair. Often contradictory and rarely apparent which one is which, in my horror vacuum, I'd merge each brushstroke of her history in color combinations previously unknown. With new details of her life, adding on new strokes, it too would be dynamic, like the Bride of the Wind, elusive, and only that would do the reality justice. To quote a writer and philosopher, Susan Sontag, interpretation is the revenge of the intellect upon art. Even more, it is the revenge of the intellect upon the world. To interpret is to impoverish, to deplete the world, in order to set up a shadow world of meanings. Real art has the capacity to make us nervous. Interpretation makes art manageable, comfortable. The Bride of the Wind, to me, is a blunt reminder to not shy away, which is hard to manage or which makes us uncomfortable, be it art or history or memory. Otherwise, without even realizing, we'll be doing exactly what the oppressive regimes want us to, seeing someone as one thing, and one thing only. I resist, falling to the far-right trap of dehumanization and remembering my great-grandmother as merely the suffering instilled upon her, for she is so much more. I resist looking at a piece of art and only seek to tame it. The oppressors have already taken way too much of us. We must not let them take our minds, too. Thank you.